I'm Alice Shikina. I will be presenting Negotiating with Ease. This presentation was given to Think Tank Thursday on March 11th, 2021. Welcome. My name is Alice Shikina of Shikina Mediation and Arbitration. I am a mediator and a negotiator, so I mediate divorce cases. I also do personal injury, employment, breach of contract, landlord tenant. And I also teach a negotiation workshop for entrepreneurs who want to level up their negotiation skills. So in that particular workshop, I give you a lot of different role plays, and every single week, you just jump into a negotiation and practice it. And then we debrief it so that you can see where you need improvement. So that's what I do. A little bit of background about me. I have a long history in the theater world. I have an undergraduate degree in acting, and I have some master's work in directing. And I was also an artistic director here in San Francisco quite a long time ago, like in the early 2000s. And I use my theater skills daily in my mediations. When you are studying acting, you are learning a lot about human psychology, what makes people tick, what their motivation is, and also how to affect people. Obviously, as you watch movies, you see how actors, really great actors, can make you cry, they can make you feel angry. And so that is actually a skill that they have studied. And so, in the same sense, when I'm in a mediation, I'm constantly trying to determine the motivation of all the parties, what's really driving it, what is not being said, right? The motivations that are invisible. And I try to affect calm in the room. So I try to make sure that people stay calm, they don't get emotional, so that they can continue to go through the mediation process. So today I'm super excited because my passion is about sharing about negotiation skills. I'm very excited to share this with you all. I'm going to give you a warning that typically it takes several weeks to go over all the negotiations. Like, I'm trying to pick up as much as I can and dumping it into a 30-minute. So if you feel like, oh, she like glossed over a lot of things, it's because I'm packing it all in for you all, okay? So it's going to be more of a high level overview. I'm not going to go super deep. However, I am going to give you guys a couple of instances where we're going to go into breakout rooms and you'll get a chance to practice. So with that said, let me go ahead and share my screen, and then I will move into my presentation. All right. So negotiating with ease. How many of you, I'd love to see a show of hands, how many of you feel like you are very comfortable negotiating, whatever it may be? And then how many of you feel like it makes you feel nervous when you're going into a negotiation? Okay, so it's a bit of a mix. Great. So those of you who are comfortable, feel free to jump in with comments. I always welcome them. All right. So, because I know that there are a lot of you guys who are just as good as negotiating as I am. So what's really interesting is there is a woman called Linda Babcock. You may have heard of her. She wrote a book called Ask for It, and she talks about gender differences in negotiations. So there's definitely a difference in the way women and men negotiate. Men negotiate 4 times more than women. And partially, this could be attributed to the fact that when boys and girls are growing up, boys have a tendency to get the jobs like mowing the lawn or clipping the bushes or something larger so that they can actually negotiate some pay for it. And they might even actually go out in the neighborhood and start negotiating with the neighbors to say, hey, I'll mow your lawn if you give me $5 or $10, right? So these are small negotiations that they are practicing when they are children. Women, or girls, I should say, get more like washing the dishes or setting the table. And so their daily chores are a bit on the smaller end. So it's never something that they would negotiate because it's just considered being part of the family, doing what you need to do. And so they get less opportunities as children to negotiate. So this shows up in your adult life. If you take a man and a woman and they're both 22 years old and they get their very first job offer, let's say the job offer comes in at $25,000. The women typically accept that offer. What do you think the men do? They negotiate. And when they negotiate, they get around $30,000 when they're done with the negotiation. So you can imagine over the course of their lifetime in their careers, if you're negotiating salary raises and whatnot on a percentage level, Over the course of their lifetime, this is the difference. $784,192 more that a man makes. That same man and woman that started off at a $25,000 offer, the man ends up making $750,000 more over the course of their career. So it's really, really important to know that, because you don't want to be one of those people that's leaving money on the table because you're not comfortable negotiating. And some of you may feel like, oh, well, I don't really negotiate all that much. Actually, everyone negotiates all the time. You just don't realize it. Some of the negotiations are really small and some of them are much bigger. So it's really great if you can practice on the small ones so that when you do come across a larger negotiation, you feel like you have the skills that you need. So one of the big things that I tell people that they have to do is they need to prepare. I'm curious, you guys can raise your hand. How many of you actually prepare before you go into a negotiation? Okay, good. How many of you just kind of just go in there and wing it? And then how many of you not only prepare for yourself, but prepare what the other side may want? Okay, great. So that is the difference. So a bad negotiator is someone who just doesn't prepare at all. A good negotiator prepares their side, and a great negotiator prepares all sides. So this is really critical. All right. So I cannot stress the importance of preparation. BATNA is your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So basically, this means if you do not come out with an agreement, what is your best alternative? What will happen to you if you don't get this agreement? So you have that as part of your framework. And then you also need to consider, what's the worst thing? What's the worst outcome should you not have an agreement? And the reason why you want to think this through is because you want to have sort of the playing field for yourself. If you just go in and you're like, well, this is what I want, and then you sit there and you negotiate and you lose it and you have no idea in the moment what your best alternative and worst alternative are, you may end up getting a worst alternative, which might be worse than whatever negotiated agreement you could have had. So that sort of frames it for you, so that if you think to yourself, this deal is better than my worst alternative, or even more, if it's better than your best alternative, you know, I should take this agreement. But if it is worse than your worst alternative, don't take it. If you got something better going on and they don't know about it, you know, you want to go ahead and not take it if you've got something better. And you also want to make sure that you're speaking with the person who has authority, right? So for example, I'm about to go into a mediation. It's a small claims mediation. And I realized after I read the claim, it's actually a personal injury, but it's small enough to be in small claims. Nobody really noticed this, like nobody mentioned it, the court didn't mention it, but the person of authority was not planning to be present. Who is that? The insurance agent. So one person is suing the other person. However, the defendant does not have the authority because they have insurance. I called them and I said, do you have insurance? And they said yes. And they explained to me, yeah, they said that they weren't going to pay out and they declined everything. They said, however, since we're now in a small claim suit, they're going to pay. And I said, well, you cannot negotiate this number without your insurance agent there because the defendant has no authority. They cannot say yes to $8,000 if they go back and the insurance agent says, absolutely not, we're not going to pay $8,000, right? So you have to make sure that when you're negotiating, that you're actually talking to the person who has the authority to say yes or no to the final deal, all right? Okay, so the other things, I'm gonna back up a bit. The other things that you wanna think about, questions that you wanna think about when you're preparing, what might be your opening move? What's your initial strategy? What is your reservation price? So reservation price is if you're buying something, what is the highest amount you're willing to pay for it? And if you're selling it, what's the lowest amount you'd be willing to accept? And then there's all kinds of variations on that. But you need to know what your, reservation price is, where you want to stop. I am also going to give you a tip since I'm in negotiations and mediations all the time. So this is a little secret. When people say, it's my final offer, it frequently is not. Even if they themselves believe it's their final offer. So I want you to at least take that away with you when someone says that. People can always move off of their final offer. I have seen it over and over and over again. I have seen people say, it's our final offer, and the other side says, no, we don't accept it. They hang up the phone, they end the mediation, and then they call me back and they give some more numbers and they settle the deal like 10 minutes after the mediation's officially over. So it's a psychological thing. People might feel like it's my absolute bottom. I'm not gonna, accept more than less than $30,000 for the settlement offer, but there's some way that will get them off of that. And I also want to give you another tip. Another really good tool to use is time. Time. If you negotiate over a long course of time, you can get people closer together because they have already invested many hours in the negotiation. So frequently when I'm doing mediations and I'm watching the negotiations take place, they may not be ready to accept an offer in the first hour. And at hour 8, after negotiating for 8 hours, they'll say, fine, you know what? I'm okay with this because I've been sitting here all day and I've invested all this time. I don't want to walk away with nothing. And so even though they weren't ready to accept it earlier in the day, they will be ready to accept it at the latter end of the day. So I want you to know that time is your friend in negotiations. If things don't seem to be moving, keep pushing it little at a time, because eventually just the fact that people have invested time and energy into the negotiation, it will help them resolve it. Okay. So time is a really good tool to use. Other things that you might want to think about: what's your ideal deal look like? What does that look like? What are some of the issues that the other side might try to throw in there to compromise the deal? So you want to think of as many things as you can when you're preparing. What is your source of power? What is your leverage versus what might their leverage be, right? And what is their power?
Can I
Yeah.
interrupt? Richard has a good question for you. Richard, can you unmute yourself and ask this, please?
Sure, Alice. Thanks. So my question was just particularly during employment negotiations, like how important is it to find out the salary requirements from the candidate before you make your first offer, like to find out what their zone of agreement is?
So you mean if you're the employer?
Correct.
So if you're the employer, it's always good to try to find out a range, but you don't want to really pin them down. Money is the thing that's going to make or break a deal. So you don't want to start off with money. You rarely want to start off with the money if you have other things you can talk about, particularly with employment. You've got benefits, you've got perks, you have a lot of different things that can be offered. So both for the employer as well as the employee, a really good question is to say, for example, if I were the employee and you were the employer, I might ask you, what is it that you would typically pay someone to do the type of work that I would do? Right. So that's my way of trying to softly get a range, not how much would you offer me, which is like putting you in a really awkward spot. Right. So in the same sense, you might ask that of the employee to say, like, what's the range that you're looking for to do this type of work? And then you can get a range, and then whether you guys are in the ZOPA, which is the zone of potential agreement, right? You want to know, are you both in the same playing field, right? Does that answer your question, Richard?
Got it. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. And then again, what do they want? So you want to think about things from their perspective. What are the things that they want? Why do they want it? What are some of the things that they might leverage? And you really want to think about those things as well, and you also want to think about what kind of questions might they ask you, right? And the better prepared you are, the better it will be. Because if you think about these like off the wall questions that might come your way and you prepare an answer, then when that off the wall question comes your way, you're ready to answer it. You're not going to fumble. You're not going to say, I'm not really sure. You know what I mean? And you're not going to be trying to figure things out on the fly. So you want to prepare like you're preparing for an audition. And so you might think about all the various questions they might ask. If I am an employee looking for a job, I might think about, they might ask me, what salary do I want? How many days off do I want? Do I want to work remotely? And what kind of benefits do I want? And, just think about all of these different things that they may ask me so that I can be prepared when I'm answering. Because when that happens, it's kind of like watching a play when everyone has their lines memorized versus watching a play when people are forgetting their lines, which is what it looks like when you're unprepared for a negotiation. So you really want to consider the things that they want. So here are some strategies. I'm going to kind of briefly go over them. You want to ask easy questions first. So like I was telling Richard, you don't want to just be like, hey, so how much money are you looking to make? Right? Those are all the hard questions. So you want to build the rapport. It's so important. Even if you're going in to buy a car or even a house, build rapport with the person. So why are you selling the car? Like, are you moving? Are you getting a new car? Or why are you selling the house? Or why are you buying the house? Are you trying to, do you have kids? Are you planning on moving to this area because of the school district? And really just build a rapport. Be chatty, but you're actually getting information and you're building rapport. Now, why is this important? Two things. People frequently buy and do deals with people they like. All right. So you're building the rapport because you like each other. So when you like each other, it's much easier to build that rapport and do the deal. You're also asking questions because you're trying to suss out what other things can I use as leverage when I start negotiating in a few minutes or in a few hours or in a few days. Okay, so you want to gather that information. Talk about money last. Find out all of the creative solutions first. So you don't want to get into a negotiation where you're stuck because let's say you start talking about money first, it looks like you're not even in the zone of potential agreement at all, and now you're stuck and now it feels really awkward. You don't want to at that point in time decide, well, let's think of like what else can we do. You want to actually think about all of those things beforehand in the beginning, to think about what are some of the creative solutions that we can do. What's cheap to you but valuable to them, right? For example, as an employer, maybe you have a special deal with a health club, and maybe it's like no big deal to add another employee to have health club benefits. But then maybe for the employee, that's really valuable, because normally maybe they're paying $80 a month. So for them, they'd be like, that would be fantastic. If I can get a free gym membership, that's great. So that's an example of how it might be cheap to one side, but valuable to another. So you want to determine and investigate and dig to try to find all of these things so that once you go into the negotiation, you have multiple sliders. The most difficult negotiations I found is when there's only one variable and that variable is only money. That's it. So sometimes it's easier when you can actually add time, right? So it's not just about like, hey, you owe me that money, but how much time can I have to pay you back? But then in other issues such as employment, such as real estate, there are multiple variables and you can use all of them for negotiating. So I really encourage you to like try to be creative, try to think of all the different things that you can throw in there for them to sweeten the pot, right? What we call like increasing the pie, all right, which is like all the different things that people will agree on. Another good thing to do is ask, where are you inflexible or what are your non-negotiables? And the reason why you want to phrase it that way is because if you ask it in reverse and I say, hey, Richard, where are you flexible? You may not want to show me your cards. You might want to be like, I don't want to tell you where I'm flexible because I know you're just going to go for it, right? So if I say
That seems a little personal too.
when I say, what are your non-negotiables? More than likely you will be fine telling me because you want me to stay away from those issues anyway. So if your salary is non-negotiable and you're the employer and you're like, this is the amount we're paying, and let's say it's already out and about, or even if it's not, you might say, Alice, whatever the deal is, whatever we discuss, salary is not negotiable. We cannot talk about that. Great. Guess what that tells me? It tells me I can negotiate everything else. Okay. So you are getting information by asking it in reverse. People don't want to tell you like, oh, here's my vulnerable spot. But if you say, what are the things that I should stay away from? People are going to be happy to tell you the parts that you should be staying away from. And also making multiple offers is a really great thing. I coach women who are divorcing on how to negotiate their divorces. And what I typically do is I coach them on coming up with 2 or 3 equivalent offers. So when you come up with equivalent offers, it means you are fine if the other side chooses any of those offers. They can pick A, B, or C, and you're like, I'm fine with it. So you want to craft it and put a bunch of different things in there, timelines, money, other things, whatever, and then have 2 or 3 different packages, and then you can offer those. That particular strategy usually moves the negotiation quickly. particularly if one side, let's say the other side has not prepared as diligently as you have, and you show up and you're like, hey, I've got these 3 deals for you. Even if they don't take B right off the bat, they might say, actually, I will like B, but let's negotiate this one critical piece in B. It's already narrowing down your negotiation. You're not like in the wide open field. You already have it down where they're like 99%, we're like agreed upon. Let's negotiate this 1% or the last 10%, right? So that will really accelerate the pace at which you're negotiating. Another one is anchoring. Anchoring is when, how many of you usually like to say the first number? Like when you're negotiating to say, okay, I want this, and to be the first person to put something down. Anybody do that? I don't see any hands up. A few people. So anchoring is a good technique. You should not use it blanket, with everything. Use it when it's necessary and when it's appropriate. Anchoring is when you throw out the first number or the first offer. Why would you do that? Because you want to strategically throw out that number because you want the negotiation to revolve around your offer number, right? So if you feel confident that you can get something that's closer to where you are and you want to pull them over there, you're going to throw out the first offer, knowing that when they start negotiating, it's going to be closer to yours as opposed to whatever they throw out. So if you feel like, hey, I've done my research, let's just make it really simple. Let's say you're purchasing a used car. It's out there for 10 grand and you've researched it and you feel like maybe you can get them to go as low as 8 grand, maybe, right? But you feel confident that that's not so low that that would offend them. You might consider anchoring by saying, hey, would you take 8 grand, right? Because now the negotiation is going to start at 8 and they're going to try to bring you up, but you've like anchored it at 8, as opposed to them saying, hey, would you take 10, would you buy it for 10 grand or buy it? Because now it's suddenly a little bit higher. So anchoring is a technique to use depending on when it's appropriate. And again, to be prepared for all scenarios. The last technique that I want to make sure that you all are aware of is listening. It's so important to listen. You want to listen to the other side because you want to hear what's important to them. You want to uncover some needs and wants that maybe they did not bring up, because there's always something there. There's always something. And so the more you listen, the better informed you're going to be because you're capturing data. Okay, so you want to try to listen. So we're going to do breakout rooms and we're going to do a listening exercise, and I'm going to show you what the directions are. So what we're doing is we're going to pair up. Somebody's going to be person A, someone's going to be person B. I'm going to give you 2 minutes for person A to talk. And you're going to talk about your pet peeve, something that bothers you. And you're going to talk for 2 minutes. Then the other person who is listening, well, first of all, the listener, you're only going to listen. You're not going to ask questions. You're not going to retort, nothing, only listen. After the 2 minutes, person B has a minute to recount what they heard. Okay, I just want you to tell them, hey, what I heard you say is, and repeat it back. And then when they finish, then person A, I'd like for you to just give feedback to say, hey, you did a great job on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the top. You're a 5-star listener, or you missed a couple of details. Maybe you're more like a 3, right? And then we're going to switch roles. So I'll be sending out messages. I'll broadcast and say time to switch, time to recount, time to give feedback, and so on. And then you'll switch, do steps 1 through 3 again, and then we'll come back and then we'll chat and then we'll move on again. Okay, so are we ready with the breakout rooms?
I'm putting them together right now, but make sure to take a picture of this, you guys, so you have it in your breakouts.
I would love to hear from a few people. If you'd raise your hand and maybe I can call on you. But what I'd like to hear is A, how that went, but also what did you learn about yourself as a listener? Who would like to share?
I'll share.
Shelley.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I was with Linda. I don't know how to pronounce her last name. And she basically had emotional ups and downs. I captured that. She gave a lot of detail on what she was talking about, which I found a little challenging to keep track of all the details in my mind, but I got the gist of it, but I certainly captured the emotion. So maybe it's easier to catch feel someone's emotion than catch the fine points and the fine details.
Great. Thanks, Shelley. Who else would like to share about what they learned about themselves as a listener?
I'll share. Bridget Potterton from San Diego. My partner was Raylene and from Huntington Beach. And one thing that I have learned from listening to her, but also in my normal life as well, I tend to get excited when I hear about something I'm interested in and I want to stop them and ask a bunch of questions right then and there. But I know that wasn't part of the exercise. So I kind of have to shut myself up and say, okay, wait, not my turn, not my turn, not my turn. Keep quiet. It's hard.
That's great. No, that's wonderful. It's a really great, I feel like this is a really simple exercise, but it brings a lot of self-awareness into play. Who else would like to share just sort of like what it was like? Allegra.
Hi. Yeah, I noticed that, well, two things: that I don't listen as well when I'm trying to write down what, things to remember. I think I would have had a better time if I had just was engaged face to face versus trying to write notes down. And then two, like, I'm still getting used to Zoom and like seeing my own face. I got totally like distracted for a sec and definitely missed like an important detail. So yeah, it's
Great.
my own
Thanks,
picture.
Allegra.
Yeah.
Thanks. Lynette.
So my husband says I'm a horrible listener. So poor Christine, I had to be really intent on listening to her because, again, I've been socialized that I'm a very bad listener. But I really felt like that eye contact where I did put down the pen was super handy. And it could be too that we knew we were going to listen for a short period of time, whereas maybe in a work day, I'm going to listen for a 45-minute call and I'm taking copious notes because that's how I learn. But certainly that intensity of listening, I think, can be very valuable.
Thank you. Matthias.
One of the things that I noticed, I was with Jackie Z. One of the things that I noticed is that I found myself creating the backstory for the things that she was objecting to. And then when I related to her what I had heard, I added that in. In particular, she was saying that that certain things, that she didn't have patience for certain things. And what I added into that was that you feel that you find that your life is changing, that you're losing patience that you used to have. And that's so, that was something that I thought was interesting about myself.
Thank you. Pamela Mims.
Yes, I was with Kim, and what I noticed as far as with myself, as far as that I never picked up on before, is how the passion that she has for what she does, and listening, seeing that passion that she had made me even more so listen to her, but seeing it and feeling it, I never noticed that I paid attention to that sort of thing, that I even wanted to hear her again, what she said, as far to see was that passion still. So it put me a different perspective on as far as on her. Also.
Thank you. Thank you. That's great. Eric.
2 points that came up. I was in the room with another guy. So just want to give you the mansplaining. No, I'm not going to mansplain, but there's two interesting things that came up. One, especially if you're interviewing and negotiating, and especially if it's for a position of sales or business development, it's almost expected that they're going to give a number, expecting that person to counter, to negotiate, to try to bring it up. That's kind of their first sale that they got to make. So anybody who is resistant to negotiating in that scenario or just don't like that kind of confrontation, I think it's expected. My perspective on that. The second thing that came up was the distinction between negotiating and compromising in a scenario where both of them are actually trying to get an agreement of something, but negotiating might think of it more as I'm trying to keep as much and take as much away from the other person and not lose as much is negotiating. But compromise, people are a little bit more long-term thinking in I'm willing to give up a little, you're willing to, for a longer term relationships. And they're different, but a lot of people conflate compromising with negotiating. And I thought it was valuable to make that distinction.
Thanks, Eric. And the last one, I'll take Clint.
Yeah, so just an observation. I find when I listen, I tend to be a problem solver, and sometimes the speaker just wants me to listen and not to solve the problem. And I don't know if that's a caretaking aspect of myself or not, but not knowing the difference between them wanting me to help solve a problem versus me just being a sounding board.
I find it's really refreshing to just ask. Just say, do you want me to help you resolve this, or do you just want me to listen? I feel like I appreciate when I get that choice, because sometimes I do just want someone to listen. So to be given the option and to be able to pick the one that I want, it's really refreshing. So, I mean, I would suggest you try that and see how that works, because it's really frustrating when someone is talking and they're expecting one response and you're giving the other, right? Like maybe they want you to just listen and then you're sitting here trying to problem solve. So it's great when someone says, hey, I would love for you to just listen because I need to vent for a bit. Great. All right. So, and then how was it just generally, overall, how was it to just be listened to for like a minute to 2 minutes? Did everybody enjoy that? Where you could just talk, thumbs up for those of you who liked it? It feels nice because it rarely happens in today's world. Everyone's back and forth, and no one ever really has just like undivided attention, right, from someone else. So it's really important. I know that listening is an important part of communication, but it's also a really strong component of negotiation. A really good negotiator listens very, very carefully, because in all the communication and all the words that are coming your way, there's going to be something that you can use, you can find. It's that gold nugget that's going to help you like finish the negotiation and close the deal. Okay.
Alice,
Always hidden. Yeah.
I just want to add something. Thank you so much. So the excuse to have 2 minutes just to speak, for if you're the type of personality that usually shuts yourself up really quickly, is magical. And I really love that distinction to, from now on, go in and say, you know what, I'm going to give myself permission to just 30 seconds, a minute, to say exactly what I need to say, own that time, and then someone can respond. So I'm going to use this exercise for the next time. So thank you.
That's awesome. Yeah, this is definitely an exercise that you can use to improve your ability to listen. And you can do it with somebody that you're interacting with on a daily basis, whether it's your spouse or your children or your coworkers or whatever, just to say, it takes like 6 minutes, and you can shorten it if you do just a minute back and forth, but it really helps that it trains that muscle, that listening muscle. So yeah, I definitely think you should do it. And also, when you're going in to have a conversation and you know that it's something important to you, if you feel like you need a minute or 2 minutes, just ask for that time. Just say, there's something I want to say. Please give me like 2 minutes of undivided time that I can talk. It's going to take me about that long, and I want to get it out, so that you have that freedom, right? That someone's not going to interrupt your thought. They're not going to say, but, no, that you have that. So ask for that time. That's totally okay. All right. Last few things, and I just want to open it up to questions because I know we're getting to close to 3 o'clock. Negotiating with your kids. So for those of you who have kids, you can use these negotiation skills. The most important thing is that people skip the listening part when they're negotiating with their children. And that is the reason why people are in boardrooms and they're like, hey, I'm doing a good job. Why am I going home and not being able to do the same thing? You need to ask those same questions of the kids to say, like, why is this so important to you? Why do you want this so bad? Is there another way that we can resolve it so that my concerns are met as well? What has to be true in order for this agreement to go forward? So you might think like, why would I do that? Because like, I'm the parent and I can just like lay down the rules. But goes back to that same thing I talked in the beginning, how people need to have the opportunity to negotiate when they're children, so that as soon as they hit their adulthood and they start negotiating their jobs, their salaries, real estate, whatever, you want them to be really good at negotiating. So instead of thinking about negotiating with your kids as, oh, it's a pain, it's a chore, I'm just going to shortcut it and tell them that they have to do it this way, think of it as a teaching opportunity. You're teaching them critical thinking skills. You're teaching them to think about why they want what they want, to argue for it, to back it up, and to articulate it. And the more you can do that with them before they turn 18, the better they will be equipped going into the real world and being super successful, because now you have like given them all the tools that they need to move on. The best way to get better at negotiating is practicing. You cannot just take a course. You cannot just come listen to me talk for half an hour or do whatever it is and think, oh, magically I'll be much better. You need to be practicing. A lot of you guys are attorneys, I know, and so you do that on a daily basis. But if you're not, get together with somebody, practice it. Ask your best friend before you go into negotiation, I need to role play this. You need to be the hard ass person and asking difficult questions and role play it till you feel comfortable, even if it's 2 or 3 times. And you just need to be constantly negotiating, or come take my negotiation class. Great places to practice, stores, work, school, with your kids, with your boss, with your spouse, and that sort of thing. I would love to open it up to questions before I ask one last question to everyone else. Anyone have questions? Pat.
Yes. How do you respond to someone who talks over you or interrupts you when you're trying to negotiate?
So you probably can just address it and let them know that you'd like for them to hang on. So when obviously this is different because I'm the middle person, right? But I usually say, hang on, let them finish. So you might want to say the same thing. Say, let me finish, and then I'll go ahead and let you talk, right? So, and if you feel like you know this person and they are doing this before, for beforehand that they were going to do this, it's really good to set up those ground rules at the beginning. To say, hey, this is what I would like to have happen. I'd like to make sure that we hear each other and that we're each able to express ourselves. And so what I'd like to do is make sure that we don't interrupt. If one of us accidentally does interrupt, please let each other know, to say, hey, you're interrupting, hang on. And then that should be the cue for them to back off and say, okay, sorry, let me wait.
Good point. Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions? You guys have no questions?
Okay, I have a question.
Okay.
So we use mediation in work all the time, right? We're constantly negotiating. I think I read an article that we make something like, thousands of choices every day, and it's just constant. But all of this can translate into our personal life. So there are a lot of questions in the chat around negotiating with your children. And I know you wrote a book specifically about that. So can you give us some tips about that, and perhaps even general tips about how to translate some of these thoughts to your personal life, if that's helpful for people?
So wait, let me make sure I understand your question. So how does the negotiation plays back into your home life?
Yeah, like how can you translate some of those business concepts that we use in our day-to-day business life without it coming across so professional and impersonal, right? Because sometimes I remember my ex-husband used to say, like, you're just trying to like lawyer me, stop it. And so I think there's a way you have to soften some of this in personal relationships. So if you have any ideas about that with your kids or your parents or your family, that would be interesting.
Right. So one of the things I do a lot, so I've got 2 teenagers, one is 16 and one is 13, and there's very little conflict. Well, first of all, they're pretty non-confrontational, but when there is a conflict, I use these tactics with them. So one of the things that works very, very well is the whole package A, package B, package C. And so maybe my kid comes up and says, hey, mom, can I do X, Y, and Z? And I don't want them to. Then I will give them a couple different options. And so then sometimes they feel like, okay, I think I'm going to do this other thing that mom wants because I don't like her other option. Right. And then there's not a fight because I'm always giving them an option. So they have the power. So you have to let them feel like they have some kind of power and ownership over their own decisions. So even though you're the one presenting them with a couple of different options, they're the ones choosing. And that's so important because you are not imposing on them. You're just saying, hey, you can do this or you can do this. And usually that is a very effective method I have found. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. That plus deep listening, like really asking a lot of questions about why it's so important. Why do they need to do that? And then you can talk about your own interest, right? So it's not your position. Like, I don't want you to go to the party. More like, I'm concerned. I'm worried. There might be drugs at the party. There might be violence or what, like those are my interests, right? The concerns I have. And so then to discuss that with my teenage kid as to why I don't want him to do something like go to a specific party, it is talking about the interests. And then we can brainstorm together what is an appropriate solution based on what they want and my concerns and my worries, and trying to mold those two together.
So you know what, Alice, you
I
also
have a,
just
oh, I'm sorry, I have my
used,
hand up.
well, I just wanted to point out just really quickly, because you also used like your own technique there that I just wanted to point out because you didn't say it, which is you clarified the question before you answered. And not only does it make sure that you understand, but it also gives you time, right? It also gives you time to think about what it is that you want to say.
Yes, yes.
So.
Akeisha? Thanks, Kim.
Thanks. I have a question. So what if you're in a negotiation and someone just accepts your offer? Is it a good idea to say, oh, wait a minute, should I renegotiate from the offer because they accepted so quickly?
I mean, that's right. That's like something that you have to consider before you putting out your first offer, right? So yeah, I think you just need to think about like, am I going to be okay if they say yes to this offer? Right? So that's part of the preparation. And so you don't want to just throw something out thinking like, well, I'm just going to like give something and then think, oh, wow, I could have asked for more. Just think to yourself, am I going to be okay if they accept this? And that will help you be prepared when they do say yes to that first offer. Natalie.
I actually have the opposite question to Akeisha's is if they don't accept the offer or if they not accept the offer, like what if you're just at an impasse and you just can't come to agreement? What are your recommendations then?
So typically I see impasses when people are bargaining for their position. So like you're saying you want to go to Hawaii and I say I want to go to Mexico, and then we're at an impasse. Usually when I'm mediating, people always come to me because they are at an impasse. And the majority of the time I'm able to get them to some kind of agreement. How do I do that? I do that by asking so many questions. I ask and ask and ask. It's like I'm a private investigator trying to find out like what it is that's driving this person, what's important to them, what's their non-negotiable, right? And once you ask those, you will almost always find a way to like resolve it. An impasse means you just haven't dug deep enough to find out like how else. And you want to consider like, what are some of the other things that we can, creatively, what can we offer? If I offer this, or if I offer time is another good one. Someone's like, oh, I never realized you can negotiate time. You can always negotiate time as well. So try to put in more variables, and those variables will help loosen that impasse and it will get you there.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yes. Krista, am I good on time? Am I out?
If people have a few more questions, we have a little bit time. Everyone can just, quietly leave when they need to. But if there are more questions, we have a little more time. Does anyone have another question or comment?
Andrea. There was an active conversation in the chat about what I called recreational complaining, but about setting up conversations about, do you want a solution to this or do you want to just talk? And it was very interesting to see that people were having all kinds of protocols for doing that with each other. I mean, it's an interesting negotiating tactic to say, I'm just going to air stuff out here. Is that something you would use?
I think that I believe that if you want to just air stuff out, I think it's really smart to let the person know, right? To just say, okay, so Laura, I just want to tell you something and I don't want any solutions. I'm just upset and I just want to tell you about it, right? Because if you set that, for me, expectation is everything, everything. Like there are so many people unhappy in this world because of unmet expectations. If they all had their expectations set, everyone would be going around the world happily, right? And so for me, if I came to you and I said, Laura, I don't need any solutions, I just want to vent for like 2 minutes, then now you know what the expectation is. So I think it's really important when you negotiate to do as much as possible to set the expectations of the behavior that you want people not to interrupt, that you agree, you have some agreements, right? Like if you interrupt, you will allow me to remind you that you're interrupting and you agree to stop, and I will do the same, right? To do that. It's a very strong tool and it works. As long as everyone is in agreement prior to getting upset, you can move on using those verbal agreements. Andrea?
I'm curious. I was involved in a negotiation once, and there was actually a mediator in the room. And one of us was putting forth proposals and the other side was just going no. So it was like half of a negotiation and nothing was moving. And in my mind, the mediator wasn't doing their job because I was like, this isn't moving. We're not getting anywhere. And what do you do, Annette? What do you do when you're in that, or you're there and you don't even have a third party in the room, but you sort of have kind of half a negotiation?
Yes. Well, first you want to find out if they're really there in earnest. You know, like, were they there just to check off the box, or are they actually there to?
No, this was a divorce negotiation. We were all there in earnest.
Okay. So then, you know, you want to just start to ask questions. Like, anytime any of you guys are at an impasse, when you feel like the answer is no and you're not moving, ask questions. Like, I know that sounds like so simplified, but it works. Like, I do it every single day. When I ask questions, I get past the impasse because I will discover something else that I can use for the negotiation. And there have been many where I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't think I'm going to get this settled. Like, we are totally stuck. And then I'll continue to ask questions and I'll find something that's the lever. It's like in one of those, like, one of those like rooms where the mystery rooms where you have to like find all the clues to get out. And so it's kind of like that where you're like looking for the key. So those questions function as looking for the key. And there's going to be an answer that's all of a sudden going to pop up and you're going to say like, this is the key to get us out. And it will suddenly shift the whole conversation. It's like really strange and it feels very surreal because everyone feels like, oh, we're totally stuck. And the next thing you know, like, you're moving again.
Hey, Alice, can I ask you about the difference, the gender difference? Because it was very shocking to know that a man will ask 4 times, not just 1 or 2. But so do you find that women tend to lowball their initial positions compared to men? Because I often found that myself in negotiation, I would just quickly go to my bottom line, not wasting time. But for men, like, I found some men just like bluff a lot in the beginning. So it's almost like, should you advise women when they negotiate to think big and think even more bold than what their initial position are?
I think it depends on who your opponent is, right? So if you feel like you're going up against a male lawyer and you know that he's always going to highball, then you want to make sure that you're prepared for that negotiation appropriately, because there's going to be a lot of back and forth, because sometimes that back and forth is a strategy to say, okay, I'm going to take 8 hours to get to my goal because I'm using time as something that's like, you know, it's kind of like the water going over the stone. Eventually the stone changes the shape because the water is just going over it. So time changes people's perception as well. So I can't answer that question like generally. It really depends on who the opposing side is. And so hopefully you know a little bit about that person to be able to come up with a good opening strategy. I know that doesn't exactly answer a question, but that's the best I can do.
Can you just simply tell the other party that, wait, look, I don't want to waste time here. Let's just get to the bottom line. This is my minimum. And let's, I'll just walk away. Is that
Sometimes it will work. And sometimes they are not psychologically in the frame of mind to say yes to your bottom line. And so you have to keep that in mind. If it has been intractable up until the day of the negotiation, I would use that time factor and not go to your bottom line too fast. You have got to get the people in the right frame of mind to be able to accept it. And like in personal injury, people are super emotional and they don't want to accept a lower amount. And literally it takes all day to get them to a place where they finally can say yes, because they're so tired and they're like, you know what, I'm fine with it.
Thank you.
Yes. Any other questions? You guys have been fantastic. Thanks so much. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you so much for being here. It was so nice to see you, Alice, and thanks to everyone for your wonderful questions. Always great to see you all on Think Tank Thursday. We'll be here again next week, 2 o'clock Pacific time, for hashtag the best hour of the week. Wishing you all a great weekend, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.